Who's the next NBA superstar? Let's get into this. Quickly before we start the video, if you guys enjoyed this video and want to see more NBA content just like this, hit that subscribe button and that post notification bell. Anyways, back to the video. Kevin Porter Jr. was originally drafted in the 2019 NBA draft, 30th overall, originally to the Milwaukee Bucks, and then traded on draft night to the Cleveland Cavaliers. Going into that year's NBA draft, the prevailing thought about Kevin Porter Jr. was this guy was extremely talented and probably one of, if not the most talented player we had in that year's draft. But the reason why Kevin Porter Jr. was falling all the way down to the number 30th overall pick in the first round was mostly due to the fact that he had a bunch of off-court issues, and a lot of teams were scared away by that. Kevin Porter had a bunch of off-court issues in college. He had some issues with his head coach, he had some issues with different players on his team. There was just so many different issues, and a lot of teams were scared of that because they didn't know if he was mature enough to actually go into the NBA and play for their organization. Because even though he was extremely talented and all the NBA teams knew this, they were scared that even if Kevin Porter was playing well for them, he would do something stupid, and then for whatever reason they would have to cut him or whatever, and now they're wasting a draft pick on a guy in the first round, which is obviously not something you want to do. But with that being said, the Cleveland Cavaliers definitely got a steal with Kevin Porter Jr., drafting him at all the way down at the number 30th overall pick. Because remember how I mentioned before in the video, Kevin Porter is probably one of, if not the most talented player they had in that year's draft. In Kevin Porter's rookie season, it was definitely a mixed season overall. There were some games where Kevin Porter completely showed off and completely went off and showed off his talent that this guy had, and the reason why all the NBA teams thought he was so talented going into the NBA. But there was also some other games where he really showed his immaturity and just put up some bad shots, had some bad games, very inefficient games. And the biggest thing that you can really say about Kevin Porter in his rookie season was he was just too inconsistent. But with that being said, he was a rookie, it was his rookie season, and that's expected for a rookie, but especially when you talk about a guy whose skill set is like Kevin Porter, where he's just incredibly talented on the offensive side of the ball, it's kind of expected to be inconsistent in your first season. But the issue with Kevin Porter, as I mentioned before, the reason going into the draft that he was drafted so low was his behavior off the court, and this was definitely something that was not great for him in Cleveland. He had an issue with a head coach, he had an issue with the coaches on the Cleveland Cavaliers staff, and eventually the Cavs were completely done with Kevin Porter after a few different issues before that, and they actually decided to trade Kevin Porter to the Houston Rockets. And unfortunately at that point, all the NBA teams had actually passed up on Kevin Porter for exactly this reason. They were worried that maybe Kevin Porter would still be immature once he got to the NBA and would do something stupid to where they would just completely have to give up on him, and now they wasted a first round pick. Was kind of happening to the Cleveland Cavaliers, and that's exactly why Kevin Porter actually fell all the way down to the 30th overall pick. But at the same time for the Cavaliers, it's not that bad, I guess, because they drafted him with the last pick in the first round, so it wasn't as bad as it could have been if the Cavs drafted him with a top 10 pick or something like that. But from the Houston Rockets perspective, this was literally a match made in heaven. At that point, the Rockets were definitely in a rebuilding mode. They want to gather as much young talent as they potentially can, and now there's an opportunity for them to bring in a guy like Kevin Porter, who, as I mentioned before, had a ton of talent going into the NBA, and if he didn't have all these off the court issues, he probably would have been a top 10 pick, honestly. And the best part about it is the Houston Rockets only had to give up a second round pick. So you're giving up a second round pick for a potential top 10 type talent. Just an amazing opportunity for the Houston Rockets and just an amazing trade for them. But now let's look at Kevin Porter's game point by point to really describe why so many different teams thought this guy was so talented. The best way to describe Kevin Porter's offensive game is definitely him just being an absolute bucket. He can score in so many different ways, but starting off with his three-point shooting ability, this is definitely something that he can do. He can create for himself from that three-point range in terms of those side steps, which he's been working on a ton. Those step backs also he's pretty efficient with. Catch and shoot three-point shots, coming off the dribble for a nice little crossover into a three-point jump shot, a pull-up three-point jump shot, coming off a screen. He's just very talented from that three-point range. Obviously, Kevin Porter's taking a lot of three-pointers, so he's not really going to shoot a crazy good percentage from that three-point area, but he definitely has the talent to be a very good shooter. There's some players, Kevin Porter's a very good example, where he doesn't shoot an incredibly high percentage from that three-point range, but you could just tell by watching him that he is a pretty good shooter. But now talking about Kevin Porter's mid-range shooting ability, it's very similar to his three-point shooting. He can do everything. He's a pull-up mid-range shooter. He can catch and shoot from the mid-range area. He has that post turnaround fadeaway, which is something I think is very important. I mentioned that a lot in my videos. throws, and especially for Kevin Porter at his size and length that he has and athleticism, it's just such an effective shot for him, and that's definitely something he has within his game. Also, Kevin Porter has the ability to put up floaters, which in my opinion is also a very effective shot. And when you talk about Kevin Porter getting all the way to the basket, he's also very effective. He's a very athletic guy who's also very lanky, so he can definitely posterize whatever defenders in the paint. We have seen that from time to time from Kevin Porter, but also when he gets to the basket, he uses his athleticism very effectively to really finish with layups around the basket, around pretty good defenders as well. So once he really gets a full head of steam going downhill, it's very difficult to stop a guy like Kevin Porter. And overall, just looking at Kevin Porter's game on each level, he's just too good. He's so good and so talented on the offensive side of the ball. But now fast forwarding to this previous season and Kevin Porter's first season for the Houston Rockets, it was definitely a very successful season. The thing about the Houston Rockets was, obviously, as I mentioned before, they're definitely rebuilding, and the good thing about that for Kevin Porter is he's going to have a lot more opportunity, and that's something we definitely saw for him this previous season. Kevin Porter's minutes per game went from 23 minutes per game in Cleveland to 32 minutes per game with Houston, so obviously he had a lot more of an opportunity to actually do well in Houston, and he definitely took advantage of that. Kevin Porter had some incredible games. He had a 50-point game, he had multiple games in the 40-point range, and overall Kevin Porter had a great season. He averaged almost 17 points per game on 42% shooting from the field, also 6.3 assists, which is actually very impressive to me personally, because Kevin Porter is known as a guy who's a great scorer, and the fact that he's actually able to pass the ball around pretty effectively and efficiently and get his teammates involved, I think it's a very good trait for him going forward. Also adding 3.8 rebounds per game, which is pretty good for his size as well. Kevin Porter this previous season, in my opinion, just showed so much promise. Of course, his previous season wasn't perfect. There were some games where he definitely didn't play well and showed his inconsistency once again, and that's probably the biggest issue for young and up-and-coming players who have a lot of talent like Kevin Porter, which is they have some games where they're completely incredible. Jamal Murray is actually a perfect example of this, where Jamal would have some games where he's completely incredible, and then the next game he would be terrible. He would have one stretch of games, maybe 5, 10, 15 games, where he's amazing, and then after that he completely falls off. Taking your game from a very talented young player that's maybe close to an all-star level, maybe not there yet, but to that all-star level, and then eventually even to that superstar level, the biggest thing that you really have to conquer is those consistency issues, and that's definitely something that Kevin Porter needs to address and really needs to focus on going forward. But why do I personally think that Kevin Porter can take his game, where now currently he's definitely a good starter with a ton of talent going forward, to actually a potential superstar going forward, or maybe at the very least an all-star level talent? When I actually look at Kevin Porter on the court, he's just so incredibly talented. He's a great three-point shooter. He has so many different options when he's there. As I mentioned, he's a very good from that mid-range area, also getting all the way to the basket. As I mentioned, he's just so versatile on the offensive side of the ball, and the biggest thing and the biggest key that actually stands out to me is the fact that this previous season for the Houston Rockets, he's definitely shown an ability to actually pass and play make. And when you're talking about a guy who's such a great scorer like Kevin Porter is, you typically don't see that ability, especially this early in their career. So that's definitely something very important for me personally seeing going forward, because when Kevin Porter has games where he's completely going off and firing on all cylinders, he's going to start to see some double and maybe even some triple teams. So the fact that he's shown the ability to pass and play make, now he's easily going to find those wide open teammates either in the corner, cutting all the way to the basket, maybe at the wing. And what that's really going to do more than anything else, besides just getting assists and adding to his stats, is that's actually going to help your team win. So that's definitely something very exciting to see going forward. Now, another reason that I think Kevin Porter is going to at the very least be an all-star going forward, maybe even a superstar, is, as I mentioned before in the video, there was definitely a ton of concerns around Kevin Porter's maturity off the court, which is still a concern at this point in his career. But ever since he's gotten to the Houston Rockets, he's definitely done a lot better and seemed to have a little bit of a change of attitude ever since he's gotten to the Rockets, and realized that he has to really behave off the court in order to fulfill the potential that he can potentially be. Because on the court, I think he's proven to himself that he has the capability and the ability of actually becoming an all-star and a superstar in the NBA one day. So I think now he kind of woke up and realized that he really has to put in that hard work, and I think he has been ever since he's gotten into the Houston Rockets program. And overall, I'm just very excited to see what he can do going forward. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you guys think Kevin Porter has the potential and the talent level to actually become an all-star in the NBA and maybe even a superstar, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, please leave a like and subscribe and hit that post notification bell. It really helps me out a lot. Until the next time, peace out, guys.